Hi, and thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Wixon, and this is TPL Media. Thanks for joining us. Subscribe, tell a friend, spread the word. I'll be joined today by Paul Macucci, and we are talking about the by-elections going on in Canada. Paul, if you don't mind, I want to share this with you. This is notes from our very own, one of our producers, Christoph. Oh. Here it is, a memo to me. On April 13th, that's today, Mike, Canadians vote in 3 federal by-elections. At face value, they filled vacant seats in Scarborough Southwest, University, Rosedale, and Terrebonne. Sorry. I always say that wrong. In reality, they may determine whether the government of Mark Carney moves from minority rule to one of the most unusual majority governments in Canadian history. I love his notes.
Yeah.
The Liberals currently hold 171 seats. A majority requires 172. As reported by the Toronto Star, winning all 3 would technically deliver that majority, but with limits. The Liberal government currently has 171 seats. Winning all 3 by-elections could give them that majority, but it would not allow them to limit debate or force their agenda through, which I think is everybody's concern. Now, I'll give you my response to him. Christoph, this is not a simple vote. It's a structural constitutional test of Canada's parliamentary system. And if you follow us just for a few minutes on this one, the question is, who will actually be running the country? And more importantly, who will lose power in the process? And that's our discussion today.
Yeah, Mike, and he gave me same thing, and thanks to Christoph too. He gave me some quotes for today, which are very interesting. And I had the one from Toronto Star, but CBC News had one of the most unique majorities in Canadian political history, cobbled together.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. This was like all 3. We had the natural election process, we had walking across the floor, and we have by-elections, which very seldom do we see anything like this. I don't think we have. Pierre Poilievre, of course, he came out a couple times. Backroom deals to seize a majority, voters rejected. And of course, Ipsos, from the polling perspective, my thoughts on polling. Yeah. 62% oppose party switching. 69% want a by-election when this happens, when they walk across the floor. And then Laura Stevenson focused on helping Canada survive the economic turmoil.
Oh,
that's a very interesting one. So that's kind of the party line, right? We're doing this to save Canada. Yeah, we're making moves because, if we don't have majority, we can't make those moves fast enough, and things will stall and not go forward. So you're right.
Yeah.
Now, interesting in the by-elections, Mike, you got some really interesting ones happening, and we'll start with kind of the more sure ones. You had Bill Blair step down in Scarborough Southwest. You had Dolly Begum, which stepped up originally from Bangladesh, born in there, moved to Toronto with her family, ran as an MPP as the from the NDP party, and then so went provincially. Now is coming back to run in that riding federally. So, and she's against Diana Filipova, which is a very interesting one. So that one, quite frankly,
now that's a liberal neighborhood in the last.
It is
several, actually decades now. That's been a primarily liberal neighborhood.
The Danforth, and quite frankly, a lot of Europeans who originally came to Canada. The Liberal Party, known for the Eastern European vote. People who came to Canada. My family originally, everyone. They were brought here under liberal immigration policies, so they traditionally had stayed a liberal riding, liberal vote on the federal side because of their love of the Trudeau family. Is really what that was. University Rosedale, I think Jim Lang on a bunch of shows keeps saying that he could run a watermelon in this one and win from a liberal perspective, so he wouldn't even need anyone. I noticed it was interesting over the weekend, the Prime Minister was actually in that riding.
I saw that,
Came in and did a little bit of a road show with Danielle Martin. Don Hodgson, older politician, has been around for a while. He's running. Not sure how well he'll do, but I think
that almost seemed like a placeholder in that.
Yeah, I think he's put his hat in the ring. And then, of course, a very interesting one in Terrebonne, which you mentioned in Quebec, Tatiana Auguste and Nathalie Desgagnon. And so, interesting one. you kind of have a homegrown young lady on the Bloc Quebec side who was born in France, grew up in Quebec, against a new immigrant, a Haitian lady who came in and is running against her on the Liberal side. So they're playing the new immigrant Haitian vote side against sort of the homegrown. So it looks,
Conservatives don't have a pony in that race?
they do. Adrienne Charles,
Yeah.
We'll see how she does. But that seems like a neck and neck between the two parties right
So
now.
of the three by-elections we have today, one of them is kind of interesting and might show up on one of the betting sites. Otherwise, pretty much a clear-cut by-election, which of course then puts the Liberals in a majority position. And it's interesting because our conversations, first of all, one of the things that you pointed out to me before we started this initially was, by the way, don't forget, a lot of people got pushed out of the way for these by-elections.
Yeah.
Chrystia Freeland, Bill Blair, all of these people that might have given any friction to Carney at the moment that he took power were quickly shuffled.
Yeah.
And that's why we have these by-elections. And then, of course, we've got these floor crossings. And let's just address that for a minute because, as you know, I just came back from the Liberal convention where our other TPL contributor, Brady Wedham, was baptized a Liberal. I don't know if you saw that photo. He's going to kill me for saying that. But it was a very interesting experience. We had a problem with one of the floor crossers really tainting the convention. A convention that, by the way, was well attended. We went to the Conservative convention in Alberta. It was a very different scenario here. I feel like they have a lot to celebrate. There was a lot of protesting. There was a lot of political activity in Montreal this weekend. But Marilyn Gladue really shook things up by just demonstrating to the Liberals what a wild move that was. And a lot of the feedback that we were hearing the next day, of course, Saturday, on Friday, she started talking about, she was held to task on her previous positions on things like abortion and many topics. She really left a stink in the room for Saturday. I promise you that. It was a toned down version of the Liberals that day.
Yeah.
But this is just an example to the Liberals of, okay, hold on. They call it the Big Tent. We've invited this conservative who had all of these opinions that are contrary to ours into our Big Tent.
Yeah.
That was notable.
Oh, yeah. Well, now you have, it's interesting because you don't have an overwhelming majority.
Yeah.
So, you need 172 to get a majority. Even if they get all three, they're going to end up at 174. Maybe they don't get all three. They're going to end up at 173. So now you need the consensus of a Gladue or a Michael May, to get anything
Exactly.
passed. So you're shifting power, right? Politics is power. So
how are Liberal voters going to feel when a bill is being held up that is near and dear to the Liberal heart, and Michael Ma is the dissenting vote, or Marilyn Gladue and a couple of other people more conservative in the group? How are Liberal voters going to feel on that day?
Oh, they're not going to feel good. And quite frankly, you've cleaned up. So we've talked about it on previous shows, and you mentioned it too. You've cleaned up your caucus. You've cleaned up your cabinet. You've cleaned up everyone. Asked some people to leave that you thought may probably hinder your ability to get people to cross.
Yeah.
So they did that. I think strategically it was a good idea. He did very efficiently. He gave them other posts. He moved them off. Not a lot of scuttlebutt, not a lot of dissension.
I think he gave the Ukraine in its entirety to Chrystia Freeland, didn't he? I think she's now
pretty
the
much.
owner.
Yeah, pretty much. And then Bill Blair went to the UK and got a castle. And
right
now the only one who sits there is Stephen Guilbeault, and he's still, I think, waiting to end his political career. Not the happiest guy, probably sitting on the left far end spectrum of the party. But so now you have a different mix. But now you're kind of at the whim of answering questions and making sure previous Conservative Party members are happy. So whatever you put on the floor, and you have a lot of bills. Like we took a look at actually the number of bills, Mike. So let's kind of walk through what could happen today. So if what happens is what we just talked about, they get a majority, then from there they can start to move legislation quicker. So they can change the composition of committees. They can now move bills that they're interested in and they have authored. They can move them to the front and move them through, right? Because
That's
they've
true.
changed the committees.
Yep.
If they can keep the votes moving, and if they have the same 173 or 174 seats, they pretty much have to get all those votes. So if they have any dissension within, they're not going to get them moving.
Well, this is where cobbling together a majority is a dangerous position. Suddenly you're herding kittens within your own caucus now.
But think about some of the things we're going to be talking about. So right now I took a look on the list and there's 3 pages. Let's say there's 100 bills sitting and waiting. So they deal with immigration, they deal with energy, they deal with housing, they deal with affordability. Like they deal with each of the key pillars that we talk about, almost a safety, criminal code, all those things. They deal with all the key issues. They're not necessarily supported. You know, the traditional liberal view, for example, and conservative view on crime is way different.
Yeah.
Right. So now you have, jail and bail differences. You have criminal code
I
differences.
was going to say, just the bail reform seems to slide right off the table at this moment.
Right. They're not on the same.
Immigration reform on crime slides off the table.
So take it, and I hate to use this as an example, but let's throw it on the table. So I'm sitting in, so we're just talking about Marilyn Gladue. So quite frankly, she's sitting down in Sarnia and a new immigrant goes out and harms or hurts or kills one of her constituents.
Well, her constituents have voted for somebody who's going to have a different stance on crime.
Who was a repeat offender.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, the liberal stance on that is significantly different than the conservatives.
100%. That's a great example.
That is a big divide in Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney right now. So now she's sitting there and she's like, okay, what do I do now? Because now I'm definitely done. No, they traditionally, when they walk across the floor, they don't have a good shot at being reelected anyway. But now you're really done, right? And now that brings to light a whole bunch of issues, which was, quite frankly, that was one of the big gaps you saw in the U.S. For those of you, who watched the U.S. elections and the run up. Donald Trump, that was a huge issue that he brought to bear and brought to the table against Biden, right? It was the fact that their stance on crime was so different. Their stance on immigration was way different.
Well,
right?
we're seeing castle law in Canada continually be the discussion. Now, if that falls out of discussion in certain ridings now because they have a liberal rather than a conservative, well, I'll be honest with you, Paul. Even at the Liberal convention, many of the people we spoke to were horrified with the floor crossings because they're getting people they don't want necessarily, people they didn't bargain for,
yes,
people that are not necessarily specialists in an area where the government needs to focus right now. That was palpable.
Oh, yeah. No, it is. And as we are seeing from the Iran war, life is dynamic. Yeah. So it just doesn't stop with, a vote or something you want to put forward. The war is happening, energy. Look at the two parties' difference in energy policy.
Exactly.
It's holy cow. You couldn't get a wider divide.
Now, Carney is coming closer to the center on that because of necessity, and the current situation in the world is really illustrating to us what we need to get back to doing something. We need to do something for the economy and manufacturing, and we need to get into our resources, and we need to start to quicken this process. I think we're hearing that story now more than we have. However, the conservatives are, like you say, a very different stance on it.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's provinces, Quebec and Alberta, that are going to see this as a sever moment.
Well, yeah. So think about it. So, if you're with the bloc, right now you have a seat at the decision table. So when the vote happens, you get to come forward in committee. You get to put together, your members sit on committee. They get to make comments. They need to structure bills. They're involved in the process. Majority happens, they get removed off the committees. So committee restructuring, they're all gone. New committee members come in. Quite frankly, you control all the committees because you have majority. So now all the committees, you're not at the decision table. The gentleman, his name's escaping me, who is running for the provincial seat, which is up in October, already wants separation.
In Quebec.
Yeah, Christophe.
Young guy. What's that guy? Sorry.
Yeah, you give me the name. Plan d'un nom. I always going to say Pierre Saint Plan d'un nom, but it's with the Parti Québécois. So,
and he's actually picking up a huge amount of steam, actually.
He's the front runner.
Yeah.
So now he's going to use this to his advantage. So if I'm sitting in his shoes, he'd say, look at your federal government, right? We no longer have any
We don't have any say
at the table.
They've obviously stacked the government.
They've through this cobblestone or cobbling together of government, you've created no position at the table for Quebec. So he's going to make that case big time.
Yeah.
So now that's talking about a referendum that's leading to separation. So he's talking about that. You know, we've talked about it on previous shows with respect to mining and resources and hydroelectricity. Quebec is more key than we ever think now than ever.
Yeah.
So, and quite frankly, we did a show the other day on lithium. I know, and it's getting a lot of views online. If you get a chance, watch it.
Yeah,
but,
please do. The response to that was ridiculous.
Lithium, with which we need for batteries, especially in our manufacturing of EVs and everything we're talking about in Ontario, Quebec is key. Our relationship with Quebec is key, and what that looks like going forward is key. So there's one that is critical to the future of Canada, which is key. Aluminum, steel, all the mining that we do there. You know,
even just power. When you started with power, I was like,
yeah,
we really do need to be careful about that becoming an independent business of Quebec, because what it does for the rest of Canada, certainly for the eastern, those connecting provinces, is pretty major.
So now, Mike,
and then what we sell to the U.S. is highly profitable.
So here's the interesting thing about this majority, which is probably never been seen before in Canadian history to this extent. It's been seen, but not to this extent. Quebec really, yeah, sure, they would like to be at the table. They would like to have the Parti Québécois and at the table. They would like to be represented, the Bloc Québécois. But quite frankly, they are going to be saying to the government now, we need a deal. Regardless of whether it's majority or not, to stay, we need a deal. And then you go out west to Alberta. Alberta's going to say the same thing.
We need a deal.
We need a deal if we're going to stay.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, you can end up with, you're probably going to end up with a majority tonight. But that majority hinges on the two provinces staying within Canada.
And the mandate, just to reiterate, both of those party leaders, the hopeful in Quebec and Danielle Smith, both are on the separation kick. This gives a great deal of momentum to them with Canadians. If a majority comes in and they're not getting anywhere with the government, there's no deal being made pre-referendum in the West. We have new power in the province in Quebec. There's going to be a lot of attention on separatism in this country, and it's going to be squarely blamed on this arrangement right now, a cobbled government, because there's no huge power in it. There's no massive force behind this majority government, and they're made up of, frankly, a few conservatives. One of them, I think, might be the prime minister.
Well, yeah.
I'm just saying.
No, but given, again, life is dynamic, so things are changing all the time. This issue in Iran, right, that's caused oil to become front and center.
Yeah.
Gas prices, everything else. Oil has been, so we talk about it almost, 24 hours a day. We sit here and Dan McTagg, who's been on our show many times, he's on TV every day going, gas is going up, 15, down 3, down 6. So we're primarily focused. If I'm sitting in Alberta's shoes, they're doing well right now.
Price of oil is going up.
The barrels are increasing. The price is increasing. Everything is good on their side. So quite frankly, and as a demand chip, as a bargaining chip, their bargaining chip has gone up substantially just by something happening unrelated in the world that they haven't had any impact on.
That's true.
So timing is everything, and the world is dynamic. So now, coming out of this, Alberta says, well, it's fine. You have a majority. We're not represented. We're primarily conservative. Cut us a deal.
Yeah.
Like, how are we?
That's how it feels.
How are we at the table now? And then
it feels like there could be more blockage than Carney has bargained for, to be honest with you, with this arrangement. Getting a majority seemed to be the primary focus, but now there's other challenges.
Well, I think you got to quickly now you got to quickly get across and have a discussion with those two provinces, figure out a deal, hopefully that makes them happy and keeps them sort of on side with the direction of the country, and then come back to your own internal party, which is now, for the most part, you have a few people have a lot of leverage. You've given a small group within your party, almost like American politics. It's interesting how this turns out. American politics, you have these small caucuses or small groups of people that can actually have power to block. So if at any point in time these former conservatives get together and actually form a bloc,
they barge together.
Yeah, they can call your shots. They
negotiate with each other. Okay, if you block this, I'll block that. If
then they can block whatever bill they want because they have the same theoretical background, theoretical thinking. So that's the risk you take. The risk you take is you bring them into the party and then they form factions within your party. Those factions are creating voting blocks, and because you're so close to a majority, you still can't pass anything.
So we have a federal government that's going to be negotiating with two separatist provinces.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to have potentially a lot of lockage right in the House because getting a bill through can become an interpartisan thing. And I think that's the frightening thing to people who voted Liberal is that there's a certain amount of conservative now that has flown in. Mm-hmm. They've cobbled together a by-election in some pretty safe ridings where they're likely to get this majority. But then my first thought was, okay, Mark Carney's going to get this win, and he's going to be the road runner out of town for the summer. But if I was him, I'd stick around because he's going to have to do some wheeling and dealing to solidify what he does with this majority government. He's going to have to make some friends now.
Well, proroguing the government. Christophe, what's that gentleman's name? Okay.
Paul St. Pierre Plamondon.
No, okay.
Did I say that right?
Party.
Say it again? Plamondon. PSPP.
Oh, okay.
All right. Thank goodness for acronyms.
Acronyms. Okay.
Thank you, CS.
Yeah. But, this gentleman gets elected, Parti Québécois. He gets elected in October. So you have a very short period. You have the young lady who just took Legault's spot, right? And quite frankly, she's in for 6 months and probably going to be removed. The Parti Québécois is yet a very separatist platform, and if they're voted through, that's where they're going. So you're going to then be dealing with that head on by the fall. The government, for the most part, this is where, and I know people know this, but they don't focus on it unless they're doing something to do with government. They're almost done for the summer.
Yeah.
Naturally. So even if they don't prorogue, I know the other day when that came up, I'm thinking that's kind of a weird discussion.
I was trying to think, why would he prorogue? There's no benefit to it.
Well, I think it may benefit if it doesn't, if he didn't get majority. So if something went like terribly wrong today, and he doesn't get majority for some reason, then I think maybe he'd look at it and say, okay, I got to try to figure out how to get to an election.
Oh, please. He's got enough money to get another person.
Yeah. No, but I think we'd have to figure that out, or he'd have to figure that out at that point. So I never thought of that as...
I guess I just thought, we're so sure going to win a majority here in this government that there's not much that would be prorogued about.
Yeah, we're done. Government is done. I think it's the second or third week of June. Anyways, we're in, coming into the middle of April. So we got another, month and a half or 2 months to go. It'll go quick. Most times they travel, for example, he'll be back on the road. Not a lot will get done. They'll do a lot of committee structuring. You figure it'll take them at least 2 or 3 weeks to reformat committees after this.
I was going to say there's going to be a whole new group of people sitting in committee on issues that I think kind of sat there before, to be honest with you. He didn't need to address.
Exactly. The world, even today coming in, you and I saw it, Trump and the Pope are arguing. There's blockades in Iran. There's so many critical issues happening. Even if he did focus on new legislation and new committees and everything, does he make it by summer break? I doubt it. So summer break, there won't be a lot happen. They're off for the summer. They don't come back till September, October. He's going to be deep into budget time because he's deferred the budget right now. So there will be
That's what I think his summer is, the next story that we get told.
Yeah, explaining probably the budget overruns for this year, and then quite frankly talking about what's coming up, where we're going next. But you have to remember, in the middle was our date for Kuzma. So you also have our date for Kuzma, you have the budget, you have a bunch of stuff when they're finished session anyways. You have all these new government people that you're trying to figure out where they're going to vote. They have all new Liberal members trying to figure out where they sit, what they think. So he's going to take the time to sort of massage that, meet with them, figure out what they can, convince them of his platform in the fall, see where we end up with Kuzma. There's so many things happening. It's a lot. It's a lot.
He has a lot to deal with right now.
Oh yeah,
right now,
unbelievable.
So I wonder how he gets to the summer with. I think the Liberal Party overall has put themselves in a position to have a very busy summer, frankly.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know that a summer recess is going to work for them.
It worked from them from a perspective of they get time to retool and see where they're at and everything else. Unless, and this is the big, the wild card, again, the world's really dynamic as far as what we're seeing right now. Things get worse on the gas front.
Yeah.
So then they're going to have to come back and they're going to have to take some measures and figure that out. We were supposed to, for major projects, just before he leaves, he's supposed to announce what's happening with Alberta.
Right.
So we do have this, they did relax some of the environmental standards with respect to oil. And that was done in conjunction with the Alberta government,
right,
which I think the provincial government, which was really good. So now he's coming up to the deadline where he's got to announce what he's going to do with pipelines, which was to be negotiated under the MOU up until June. So he's got that coming up before he leaves. He could postpone that. Not a good idea to do because, quite frankly, you already have all the referendum. So all the referendum stuff's actually loading up also. Alberta is very busy over the summer.
I was going to say, you don't want to leave Alberta to its own devices over the summer.
No.
They've got Stampede. Albertans get together. This is where you're going to get them getting together and coming up with ideas together.
But you then possibly now with the blockades, everything happening in the world and the disruption with the oil supply, you have a very, very lucrative Alberta oil and gas industry growing. And then you have a lot of people looking at it and saying, if we don't get our way. So, you got to, again, that's that whole leverage point due to the dynamic oil and gas industry across the world. So
once again, timing?
Timing's not great right now. So, you're getting this majority, but you got issues. And as we just talked about, we have this election coming up in October in Quebec.
Yeah.
So in an increasingly challenging world where, remember, this is, on our lithium show, we're talking about the fact that today, and this is as we were coming into this show, the U.S. has blockaded the ports of Iran.
Yeah.
Right. So someone said to me, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, what it means, quite frankly, is China now is in play.
And they're not going to be happy. The cutoff of energy to them is going to become significant. Now, they have resources, they have reserves, and they've done a good job of that. Although they're saying 8 to 10 weeks from now, they're not going to be happy.
Right.
And then they have to restock. That's another 3 weeks to do that.
So if, the peace deal fell apart on the weekend, right? This 2-week ceasefire, and a ceasefire is still happening, but they talked, they didn't reach a deal. Blockade comes in now. So now they're saying to them, okay, we really need to negotiate, or if we're not negotiating, nothing's going in or out.
Right.
So that puts extra pressure on the whole scenario. And quite frankly, if in the end of the day they do concede, which right now, if they do block off imports and exports into Iran, it does force a potential surrender to the United States. And then at that point, the United States really controls the region.
The other option is
it doesn't. Right.
and China takes a position of defending their current purchase plan.
Right. But
And they don't, GDP is a big deal to China on the world stage right now. They don't want to mess with that.
right.
They have every reason to keep their economy moving the way that it is. This is potentially going to draw them in.
Yeah. But think about that too, Mike, because then coming back to Canada, that has all kinds of implications of the things we get from China
Of course. Yeah.
and Australia, lithium for our batteries, for all our, again, it all comes down to key resources and where they come from. Quebec is instrumental in those key resources. So I don't think people realized how much we became codependent on. Quebec is very quiet. You were there when you and Brady were heading to Montreal. We were in the car, we're talking, and we're having that conversation. I know sometimes, you go to Montreal, you go to different cities in Quebec, it doesn't look so great. I get it, right? Is it grade A beautiful? No.
It's got so much historic elements to it. A
Yeah.
lot needs to be maintained.
Yeah, it hasn't been maintained well. I think we can say that. And it
Feels
is
a
true.
little,
It's run down. So, and that's unfortunate, but that's what's happened. But I think they're very quiet about their abilities on the mining and resource front on purpose. I think that's one of the things they don't brag about. They're very industrious. They always have been.
We did talk about that. The industrious nature of Quebec has floated the boat in Canada many times.
And they've also kept, they've kept their identity very, their identity, whether it be, the language, the culture, they've been very staunch and making sure they keep that in case. So they kept that, if one day they do separate, I think they've made the strategic direction to do that.
What a position of strength, really, if you think about it, right?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we do, we're not going to need to integrate in such a way that we survive.
Okay, let's see. Just to review the elections, if you're going to get out there and vote, in the University Rosedale area, you've got Danielle Martin, Don Hodgson. I don't know. That one seems straight away liberal. Dolly Begum, Diana Filipova, and Fatima Shaban. So you've got in Scarborough, Southwest Toronto, once again, another liberal stronghold. And Terrebonne in Quebec, the real battleground, Tatiana Augusta and Adrienne Charles, and the Quebec candidate. Bloc Québécois was
Nathalie Descagnon.
Originally from France, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Living in Quebec.
Living in Quebec now.
Yeah.
So those are the races. And I guess what we'll do here is we'll follow up at some point tomorrow with a review of what happened in this. But it looks like the Toronto ridings will stay liberal, and Terrebonne is the knife fight at the moment.
Well, we said, Mike, it's going to be a majority. I think we're all we conceded that we all talked about it on shows for the last 3 or 4 weeks. It now comes down to, what do you do with that majority? How do you keep that majority? And quite frankly, what do you do constitutionally to keep Canada together?
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate this.
Thanks, Mike.
Patriotic means looking out for each other and fixing things together.
True patriotism is being in the country you love, surrounded by people you love, and great weather.
Being a patriot is being a part of your community and caring for it.
It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Patriotism is the one thing we all share.
It's okay to be critical of government and still be a patriot.
It's gratitude to your country.
Of course I'm a patriot. I'm Canadian. It's my home.
Well, actually, true patriot love is the mission.